Hi, and welcome to our panel on the Art of Curation. I'm very pleased to be here with our three guests today. I'd like to introduce Irena Popiashvili. Irena is the founder and dean of the School of Visual Art, Architecture and Design at the Free University of Tbilisi. She's also a curator and gallerist who, after spending almost 20 years in New York, moved back to Tbilisi to use her New York art world experience to raise a new generation of artists here in Georgia. We also have Thomas Dworzak. Thomas is currently the president at Magnum Photos. Thomas previously covered international news stories, including the war in Chechnya, Hurricane Katrina, and US presidential campaigns. We also have David Owen. David has had a very colorful and varied career. After opening a shop before having anything to sell in it, David dressed shop windows in London's Regent Street and had a variety of jobs in advertising and journalism. Along with his partner Angela Hill, he founded Idea, which began as a company that sourced rare vintage art and design books and grew via Instagram to become a publishing platform for photographers and luxury fashion brands. So I think it's pretty incontrovertible that we're currently exposed to more images than we ever have been before. I also think that the role of imagery in storytelling has changed in recent years. I think for a long time, images were auxiliary to storytelling, to narrative storytelling, that the image was very much in service to the story. And I feel like nowadays, the opposite is true, that now very good storytelling is impossible to do without images. And so my first question is, how do you think that this kind of shift in importance, or the shift in the role of imagery in storytelling, has changed how we as journalists, as artists, as photographers tell stories? If I can start with you, Thomas.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for coming. And well, I think sort of the obvious is that, like, the fact that me as a photographer is invited to a storytelling festival is probably already a difference, something which maybe wouldn't have happened before, I guess. And otherwise, I think, well, I'm often being asked the question, of course, so what do you do with all this avalanche of imagery, the pictures, like the Instagram, there's gazillion times more pictures than we've ever had before, and so how do you cope with this? I can talk as a photographer or as a photojournalist, and so I think maybe the simplest thing we come back to is storytelling. That it's much less than what used to be sort of the iconic images or the big pictures were important. That this is getting much less important. For us, it's much more difficult, like, to choose by. Well, it's sort of a single image doesn't really have so much meaning anymore. So I think what it focuses on, or what it becomes to, is like what we're trying to tell a story. People have a voice in their what they have to say, and it happens to be pictures.
And David, what do you think?
I completely agree that there are a lot of pictures out there, but on the one hand, it's a very good thing because the access to imagery is now so instantaneous and there's no barriers. So anybody who can actually, let's say Instagram, anyone who can get the app can choose to follow who they want, can see everything. At the same time, it's extremely difficult for photographers, and in fact, Instagram itself was problematic for photographers, and many of the people we work with and our friends initially didn't use it as a platform, and these are the big commercial fashion photographers who get paid tens of £1,000s a day, had a problem with then putting those pictures on their own Instagram account because it used to be and is so highly valued. They also have a problem with just taking a picture of, like, their kid who's just knocked something over and the cat's kind of run through it in the way that you would, because then people are looking at it and going, hey, you're the £30,000 a day man, and you've taken the same picture as me. So we kind of learned that. For us, for Idea, it was enormously welcome to add to this huge amount of imagery, because we used to be showing one picture from a book to one person in a shop, and then the simple multiplication of Instagram made that fantastically successful. Additionally, we are trying to, well, there's one thing. There's a lot of images out there. There is also a lot of the same images out there because of the ease with which anyone can republish anything, which I'm technically completely happy about. But I'm very personally pleased when we add to the imagery available in the world with something either new, which is great, but IDEA is also particularly good at pulling things from kind of the lost world of analog books. So we have many examples where we've found something which we think is unbelievably powerful, creatively usually, and has been lost and ignored. So something from 1976 that we discover, I Google it when trying to write about it and explain it and find nothing, and after us putting a piece together, photographing the magazine we found or the book or whatever, it then appears on online and on Instagram, and can be for a while the only thing that you will ever find about that thing. So that's extremely welcome. But I have one more point about it, which is the huge number of images. It's also the presentation of them in the scrolling feed of Instagram. So before, they used to have more autonomy and stand more in their own context. So Irving Penn, for example, creates a photo book, and that book, it may sit on the shelf with other books, but when you open it, you're in that world, you see those pictures as he wants them to be and to be seen. Now a photographer, like a Magnum photographer that we've worked with, so like Martin Parr, for example, if he posts on Instagram, as you scroll down, you see Martin, the Magnum photographer's image, but you probably passed two taken by your mum, and various pictures from colleagues, and lots from celebrities that you might follow. And they're no longer so separate. You can literally feel the pressure of the pictures that you haven't yet swiped to. So the time that you spend looking at anything is going to be tiny. The speed with which you see so many diverse images, which when I was growing up in suburbia would have taken 3 months perhaps to see even 10 or 1% of what IDEA actually publishes itself every day going out. It cannot be that people spend that much time to look at things. So, final point. So the smart way of working with it, which somehow people like Martin actually do quite well, but we know what context the pictures are going to be seen in. So I don't fight it. I don't write thinking, you've come to my gallery and you're going to spend an hour looking at all of my pictures. I know that you're in the middle of, to you, a busy day, that someone is talking to you and you're eating and you're probably on a mode of transport at the same time that you're looking. And that's how we actually pitch and present. We drop things into people's everyday lives and forget the idea that there was a designated time for arts and culture, which was separate from anything else. It's now completely, or every 5 minutes of every day.
And Irena, how does this apply to the contemporary art world? Because presumably you don't have the same issue as fighting through a million photos on Instagram, that there are still fewer artists than there are photographers in the world.
No, I would start with the art history and learning art history. And for example, when I was studying art history in Georgia before I went to study in the States, most of the images in the books are arranged chronologically. What changed a lot, from the when you are talking about art history now or showing something, in a class, right? You can pull different images together and it doesn't have to be chronologically arranged. So you're talking to somebody who has learned most of art history before I went to study somewhere else from the images. So for me, for example, Andrea Mantegna was one of the favorite. The Dead Christ image was one of the most favorite image. But when I went to see it in reality in La Brera, I was disappointed, because I was not expecting to see what I was used to seeing in an image, because I always thought it was a huge painting. Apparently, it's quite small. So, arranging images and creating new contexts while teaching art history or presenting something is one thing. And another point that I wanted to bring, even when I went to see in '93, I was a student and I went to see Basquiat's show at the Whitney, and then I went back and I told my professor that I was disappointed because in the images, Basquiat looked much more interesting to me than in reality. So I think images, and right now what we're facing is with the sort of proliferation and accessibility of a lot of images, there is some certain sense of, from the point of the art, there's a certain sense of originality or seeing the original that's lost, because art is all about experiencing in the original, and even in our museum you can go and see the Renaissance paintings and light boxes. So, that's where the context of seeing the original. How do I tell now the young kids who go to see in the Georgia National Museum and they see Last Supper, but it's a light box, So how do you explain it to them that that's not the real, and you have to go somewhere else and see it? What's the difference between Instagram image and that?
And where does curation fit in this? I know, David, you're not a very big fan of the term curation, but I feel like is having a really coherent position and having kind of sharper curation even more important now to kind of cut through the deluge of images that we're seeing?
Yes, it is. I'm not a fan of I don't mind the word curation. I'm not so much a fan of it as applied to every single small boutique fashion store and everybody's own personal Instagram. And curation is lovely done by curators, perhaps in museums, and doesn't need to be done by every single person who's ever arranged some, muffins on the counter of a hipster cafe, in my opinion. However, the curation thing is interesting for us because we do that. So, and people would say, like, oh, idea, like, it's so beautifully curated. It's so clever the way you curate things. So to start with, as far as we're concerned, we're not curating a thing. We are trying to sell things, and I'm putting them up in the order that we are trying to sell them. We have a common taste between me and my partner and the people who work for us, which means that we're attracted to certain things. They're the things that we are trying to sell people. However, what happens is more when you get an audience for what you're doing, you then have to consider the responsibility of what's going on. So for a while, we were relatively, as IDEA, really popular on Instagram. We're still popular, but now other people have caught up. But for a while, we had the whole audience, if you like, for things like art and photography, design and fashion books. And I realized that there's a whole generation, including my kids, whose only knowledge, visual knowledge this is usually, of a person or a film or a subject had come from our Instagram, because there's no other reason really why they bump into things. So there is a book of the film Paris, Texas, for example, which is one of the best-selling books that we've ever found. It's a vintage book from 1984, but and luckily there are lots of them in Germany, and we keep selling it, which means I have to keep putting up pictures on Instagram to remind people that they want to buy it. But invariably, I only show the same couple of pictures, and really, honestly, I only show one picture. But she's wearing this red dress, and it's the most evocative, powerful image. Natasha Kinski, the first time I put it up there, we used to have the cover and then 2 pictures of the book, because we were doing those strips of 3 before they made carousel posts, so this shows how old I am. The cover popular, the 2 pictures, the one of her in the red dress, super popular, 10 times what the other ones do. Now this does something for IDEA, which is, you can see on the statistics and analytics they give you, not only does it get a lot of likes, gets a lot of shares, and gets a lot of new followers. So your audience is growing. So I happen to like that picture, and I did choose it originally, but there is now no way that I'm not going to show it. I would have to feel very, very confident and not that bothered about selling the book. Maybe I've only got 1 copy this time, and then I might show you Harry Dean Stanton from the movie or something else. So what weirdly is going on is that it's me curating what a lot of young people know about that movie, that image of her. And there are loads of other things, people like Charlotte Rampling, for example, where I became fairly sure that the only image that people knew was a particular photo that we kept putting up because they just don't recognize her otherwise. But I am not the only one doing the curating, because I am responsive to the ones that get the likes. And that means I keep going with that one, and I find images similar to that for a different book next time in the knowledge that they're the popular ones. So in this theory, the audience is curating these images and this impression of that book. And just to give you quickly a different angle on why it's important, when they have a show in London, say at the Royal Academy of Hockney or Gauguin or something like that, their figures of people who go in might be 200,000 people, might see it over 3 months, see the whole exhibition. They can look at all of the pictures, take away their own favorites, buy a postcard, etc. But one picture is on the poster, and one picture is on the London Tube network. And those pictures, the viewing is, that's 50 million people over 3 months that are exposed to that one picture. Somebody chose it, and we think that's completely normal, that the marketing director or the curator of the Royal Academy would have made that decision. What was weird to me is, in the last few years, that's often been me, picking things that now people know.
Irena, you wanted to say?
Yeah, I would argue that because you have an experience. So what is curation? It's like having an experience of doing a show. Curation is not about having an idea. You have an experience of what image to put, how to put and all that. I mean, for example, in Georgia, there are not many museums and exhibitions do not change very often. So guess where I take my students? To the Dry Bridge. Because you know what? Because it's display, and the people who go there, they display it every day. They arrange the objects every day. So the same way, you arrange the images on Instagram every day, and you know which ones are getting more likes. And that's how, obviously they're going to come to you to ask you, okay, which image should we put, on the poster or, on the tube? So it's, in a lot of ways, I think that curation comes from experience, even doing, arranging objects, whether it's in a space or on an Instagram page.
Yeah, I'd agree with it, but I want to go back to one of your earlier points, David, that if good curation comes from experience, then is it not troubling to you that you have less control over what you're putting on Instagram, and you're kind of relying on an algorithm to tell you or influence you as to a kind of idea of popular opinion?
Yeah, it is. So now it's quite annoying in the last 3 months that the algorithm is such that it promotes certain things. And so IDEA could quite happily just put up pictures and not be bothered about how many likes each picture gets. We could do that. However, sometimes we're doing things with somebody else. Like, for example, I've just posted a picture of my friend called Blondie, who is the subject of a book by my friend, the photographer Alistair McClellan. It goes up there because of the time of day and the other parties involved who might have just posted the same picture. It now doesn't do so well. There is a photograph of a Donald Judd bed doing better that went up just before it. It's fine, I don't mind, but sometimes it's embarrassing because you have these other parties and vested interests. Most of the time, it really is not me. It is this algorithm which looks to see how many likes is this getting in the shortest space of time, and then decide how many people it's going to show it to within those accounts. So at that point, it is really annoying. What happens is any slightly sexualized picture, invariably of women, not of men, although we do try, but those ones go like crazy and get the results. And we need it because that's how more and more people find out about IDEA, which can give our account a leaning towards something which we happen to be as interested in sexy women as we are in Donald Judd's bed, to be honest. But that's not necessarily what comes across. So yeah, there are other factors at play now.
And Thomas, from the perspective of a professional photographer, how is curation, in a kind of traditional sense of exhibitions or photography books, how has that changed in the last 10 or 20 years?
I mean, I'd like to go back to Instagram first. I think from a photographer's point of view, I find Instagram almost useless as a tool. I mean, it's funny, like what we talked about storytelling. I think for me it's useless to tell a story. It doesn't work. For me, because of the algorithm, I've tried. I mean, I'm weird when it comes to Instagram. I have a closed account. I only show it to my friends. I'm not using it in a serious way, and I've never managed to play the algorithm in a way that I could come up with anything meaningful. So I've basically given, I have a bog standard photographer's account, which I have a few hundred followers, that's it. So I think, but what that has learned me the other way around is the curating, that I'm extremely interested in people's Instagram, but I'm consuming Instagram in a focused way. I'm going into people's accounts, or I follow hashtags. I find the algorithm, like the whatever, the stream or whatever it's called, the feed, increasingly annoying and weird. I mean, I don't get it. It's kind of funny sometimes because the weird jumps in it. So yeah, that's the conundrum with Instagram, I think, especially.
I agree, because sometimes I even, like, with the sponsored images, I don't even look. I scroll.
No, I also don't look anywhere, the people I follow, but I can spend hours and hours following hashtags, following places, following, getting into people's accounts, going in. I mean, it's a bit creepy, but like following their followers or checking out their friends, and then sort of getting into all kinds of different worlds. And yeah, that wasn't really the answer to the question.
There was another point on what you said earlier. I don't think this is, and perhaps why you can't get on with Instagram in terms of like the storytelling and doing what you do in terms of reportage and really trying to say something. But certainly in the fashion photography world, Instagram is not necessarily been beneficial either. And it's not just Instagram, but because of the demands of it, the people we know now who shoot like major campaigns are being asked and required to shoot hundreds, if not 1,000 times more pictures than they ever were in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I, for instance, worked on Prada campaign and did the copywriting for their Instagram, which I can tell you nobody reads at all, but 10 million was my audience of people who are not reading it. But that was with Willy van der Peer, and the campaign was called Prada 365, which gives you like a clue as to how many images they needed. So he shot the mainline advertising, and then he shot BTS, like backstage stuff at the shows. He then shot close-ups. He then did interim bits in between that. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of images, and not just him, who's great, and all the other fashion photographers who are great, but unfortunately we have a perspective which is selling books from the 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever. I'm not entirely sure that there is any standout single images from the last decade that I would pick on to represent that time. And it may just be because I'm getting old and I can't see it. And it's certainly got nothing to do with like grunge or using digital photos or anything like that, because the 90s is full of seminal singular pictures of Kate Moss, or the pictures of, just go on and on, Jürgen's pictures or whatever. And before that, obviously, like Avedon or later Bruce Weber, and just all of these iconic single pictures. And now, maybe, unless I'm wrong, none. Instead, what we have is 10,000 pictures.
So you do think that the oversaturation of imagery in our media is actually detrimental to
but
visualizing the time that we live in?
In theory, they didn't need to do that. It's also like with magazine publishing, the advertising pays for the magazine and they really don't care about the cover price. Fine. Like that's their model, it's fine. So you take a magazine in the UK like Arena En Plus, it costs £10. The books that we publish cost more like £40, but that magazine costs £10 and they will give Jürgen Teller 120 pages. And he says yes and takes it. It's fine, but it's them doing it. It's his decision to say yes, it's their decision to say it. It doesn't cost them any more or whatever, because they don't care. It's fine. They can give him the opportunity. He shoots digital now. He switched, and he can take 120 pictures, and he could even take 200, and they could edit out some. But like that's the chances of one of them being memorable for a long period of time is very slim. And then the same magazine, and all magazines almost, put out an issue with 8 different covers. Now, the reason that they do it is that they are being given clothes and access by all of those different brands, and they promise all of them a cover in order to do it, and that's why you get 8 covers. One will be Prada, one will be Gucci, etc., etc. But again, I remember and loved Interview magazine with one illustrated cover, which would be a photograph by Herb Ritts. Then it's been redrawn in pastels by Richard and airbrushed by Richard Bernstein, and some of them, you're never going to forget them ever if you've seen them once. But it's gone now. That's not the fault of Instagram per se. It's kind of the fault of digital photography, because it costs no more to take 10 than it does to take 1. That's true. And it's the fault that these things are linked to commerce, which in a way, your work will be less so, and many of the photographers in Magnum will have less of a demand in that sense.
But it's a very similar result. It's nothing to do. I mean, whenever there are, without taking anything away from anybody who wins prizes as Picture of the Year awards or something, but I think in the last decade probably it feels increasingly stilted that there's some conclusion is made, oh, this is the Picture of the Year, whereas 10 years ago they were really the same way, iconic pictures of that represent, they're iconic pictures of Afghanistan, iconic pictures of whatever. I mean, for whatever it's worth, I mean, it's enough to be. Maybe it's good that I think kind of it's good that there are no more iconic pictures. You know, it's a little simplistic to have it all reduced to icons. I don't know.
I think I'm interested to know particularly what you think about the idea of copywriting imagery. Like, given that we are seeing so many more images, we have access to more visual cues and potentially more inspiration. In this context, is it not quite outdated to think about imagery in terms of copyright and ownership?
Well, one would still hope that it remains. I think it's important to look. What is with reposting is no copyright. I mean, a reposted picture is pretty much as much as a published picture. But everybody can do it, so there's no. I think there's a. One of the importance is also about the authorship, to bring it back to somebody. There's a lot of pictures out there, we don't know anything anymore where they come from. So that it comes a bit with the copyright. So I would say, well, I mean, that's what sort of Magnum was built on, the idea that we should defend the photographer's copyright, and we'll continue doing it.
So how do you square that with your current project on Instagram books? And I think if there are some volunteers, they're going to circulate some of his books. Could you talk a bit about that?
I mean, I can just explain it briefly. So about 5-6 years ago, I became very obsessed with, I don't know, curating is the wrong word, but I think stealing, I shouldn't say it because it sounds like, but like harvesting Instagram, let's put it this way probably. And over almost 5 or 6 years, I collected Instagram screenshots, thousands of them, to what in the end I've turned into 20 books. So those are books of pictures I found on Instagram. As I said before, like I followed hashtags, I followed places. It's all something that's remotely connected to what I do as a normal photojournalist, I guess. And so it's stories I kind of know something about. What the little bit dangerous thing in it was that I put it in. I mean, I'm often questioning myself if the satisfaction of insight and access I'm getting in Instagram is something that sometimes even outweighs my own way as a photographer. That I'd still believe that I should go out on the street and take pictures and engage with people, but there's also something incredibly seductive in getting into these accounts. And so most of these accounts are extremely small ones of people, all of them, not people necessarily who look to be seen. Sometimes they put a hashtag on it, they have a couple of, maybe 100 followers or something. And so coming back to the copyright, well, so I think it would be wrong to publish these books. I kind of could, according to some countries' legal laws, they could be published as found imagery. So what I do is I made 5 editions, and they are shown in, like, I'm showing them around, sort of like a Jehovah's Witness traveling with my bag of books, and they're in a few institutions and museums, so they have acquired them as they can go to the collection and look at the books. So it's not the ideal situation because somehow it's like they're
No one has come after you?
no, on the contrary, actually no, because like
No.
well, there's the little glitch could actually Instagram could come after me because Instagram owns the graphics. So that's something. But on this level, it's the legal thing is it's the equivalent of an artist's scratchbook. So it's like you are allowed to cut the New York Times into pieces and stick it together, glue it together again, pretty much, and they can't do anything. So
I can add to this a little bit because we've published various books which blur the lines and look at this kind of copyright. But what is certainly true is that the odds are stacked against publishing actual books. Not just because you always had to pay for the images that you use and you have to seek approval of, say, if it's a photo book of the photographer and you would have to pay for the rights, that hasn't changed. In fact, you still do that. But what is punishingly hard is that no one is taking any action whatsoever over all of the regramming and the publication of anything you want whatsoever on Instagram and anywhere on the web. So occasionally a photo agency will go after somebody and make them take the picture down, but we're talking about 0.0001% of the sheer volume that's out there. So although we like it, and we use Instagram, and I show every day I'm showing somebody's copyrighted work in an attempt to sell one copy or a few copies of their book. But at the same time, it's no wonder that it's hard to publish and to make money from books, given that you automatically, as soon as you print something, really do have to pay for that or are in serious danger of legal action. And everyone can just see all of the pictures. So ideas, there's a few things, not unlike what Thomas has done, but with an artist. So with the first book we did with Willy van der Peer, he had to fill in for somebody else who couldn't make a signing, and we only gave him 10 days notice, and honestly we didn't know him very well, but we sent him an email and we're like, we have this thing in New York and maybe you can help. And he was like, let's do a book of all of my Instagram. He said there's 465, I think it was, no, I forgot the number, 635 is the title of the book. There are 635 pictures on there. Could you screenshot them all? Could you make that into a book? And this was a while ago, so somebody with an iPhone 5 in our office screenshot 635 pictures. They're printed at the same size in the book. We only made 300 copies of the book. Obviously already you're in a situation where every single picture in that book is freely available on his Instagram, and most of the customers will follow him. But something about the urgency and the limitation of the number, like there's only 350 or whatever it was, meant that that sold out in a day. And I think what's going on is that people want a souvenir of their life as they understand it. They really want to prove that they were alive when somebody made a book of their own Instagram account, even though it was entirely free and available. That for them is enough of a hook and an idea to want that, because they know that moment will pass. And weirdly, the day it was published and sold out was the day that Instagram said, oh, pictures don't need to be square anymore. You can use 4:5 or any shape going the other way or whatever. And so his book, that first book, uniquely looks like that and really does become something to latch onto. So we do this a lot, try and focus people on, you do need to buy this because you need the proof of what's happening now so fast around you, and it's all on your phone and it's all flying about, but occasionally you just need to put something there on the shelf and go, yep, I love Vetmore.
But look what,
and I bought the book.
Look what Richard Prince did. I mean,
yeah, I was going to say that
Prince
Richard
famously
Prince
screenshot that randomly, I think very randomly, 25 pictures of people he followed. So I made, one of my books is actually an homage to Richard Prince. Yeah. So I went to these people's accounts and I screenshotted all the other pictures around when he sold them for $80,000 in Gagosian.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
If you were at Gagosian, with your books, you never know. Even a
Yeah,
position.
but in my book, what I did in my book is I went back
indicate-
to the account of the people he screenshotted. So about 2/3 of them seem to be very proud that they have become a Richard Prince print, and they photographed themselves in the Gagosian gallery and
Yeah.
whatever. Like a third of them sued his ass off, and but it's totally random. I mean, there's like the 10 pictures before in their account are as banal or meaningless or meaningful as the other ones, and yeah.
What was nice is that he did actually quite often add a comment before making his screenshot, so he is part of the work, but that was the cuter touch, I think, in the...
How does art fit into this?
Art fit? Well, there are lots of sort of quotations that not only there's a lot of talk about the plagiarism, for example, in, obviously in writing, but, the visual plagiarism is also there. And I was just telling Thomas before we started that I remember in New York before Instagram and everything, then the gallery, there were several artists that would, for example, Bill Anastasi will come with his book and will say, look, and he had these 2 pages. One was his work that he did in 1968, and another one of Warhol that he did in 1970, and he would say, he did in 70, I did in 68, and there was the whole book was like that, of the images or of the works that he did before rather than somebody else. So, I mean, especially, and this is pre-Instagram or before his work was, so ideas or the visual imagery got stolen before, it was accessible to everybody. But recently I was thinking, and for example, Kendrick Lamar's Element, and I think it was a brilliant piece in the New Yorker that Naomi Fry wrote, because he built the entire, this is a great video, but he uses Gordon Parks images, but 3 or 4 photographs of Gordon Parks, but the rest, he reenacts it. They're restaged photographs of Gordon Parks. And in a way, it brought such an attention to Gordon Parks and brought the audience that usually, would not know of him or would not follow him. And, as a result, I was talking to his publisher, I think Steidl did it, and they said that there are 10 exhibitions of Gordon Parks, scheduled. And it was partly because of this, quotation or visual quotes of his work that appeared in an unlikely context.
I do want to talk a little bit about Georgian art, given that we are in Georgia. And I'm interested to know how contemporary and young contemporary artists in Georgia are using kind of new forms of curation to kind of tell a story of modern Georgia.
Well, it's an interesting topic because I'll start with this, because usually when the young art or the contemporary art we're talking, there's a certain continuation, right? Visual continuation, something that was happening, the turn of the century in England, then it was, the next generation, then YBAs, and then now what they're doing. So in Georgia, it's a very interesting story because the young generation of artists, because in our museums you see Pirosmani, the artist from the turn of the 20th century, and then there is no permanent exhibition of the 20th century art. So in a way, there is a visual gap for, you cannot tell them, okay, go and see this, or there is no, Instagram account that you can direct them to look at it. So in a way, it's my definition that this is a generation zero, because, they are starting really from there. They would bring you the image that they found somewhere, and they are sort of appropriating these images as their own. So in a way, it's a very interesting generation, and they are really in a way strangely global, because of their specific local references. But at the same time, I would say that there's one very interesting artist who last year, for example, did a project that it's called Playground on Hinome Valley, which the name is, Hinome Valley is a biblical name of a place outside of Jerusalem. And he took it, as a reference to, he referenced the 2008 Georgia-Russia war. And how? Because he went to Ergneti, which is a little village, which is in the occupation zone. And he found, apparently there's a lady who has collected artifacts from 2008 war and then put it in an abandoned house and called it a museum. So this kid borrowed the images, the the artifacts from there and and presented them on a sports playground in one of the, and he did it on a day on July 15th where was a world championship that was happening in Moscow. So what I like that in a way that it was a response to something that happened, when he was 12 years old, that he responded to it, but it was not a propaganda style. It was, as an installation, was very interesting. And if you were curious, you would find out what was he referencing to. And as we said before, most of the art history, art history, it's like usually illustrates biblical stories or then the ideologies. And here they are creating something that you have to ask questions. Everybody has to interpret what they're doing and create their own story, right? And come up with like a verbal story to the visual that you're seeing. No?
Is there something else we want to show?
I wanted to show a video that, and I think for Georgians it's pretty understandable, but as for the interpretation goes, I think it's a really interesting video, which is...
Can we get that video?
Which is, if you don't live in Georgia or you don't know, it's called the gestures, and you would not know what kind of gestures they are because for you it would be like, yeah.
Can you all see?
So it's a young artist who did a project. It's called the Marshutka project, and marshutkas are this public transportation, and they are all yellow. So what she did, instead of like she put different tones of yellow background, and then reenactment of the gestures, how people hail these marshutkas. And it's speaking of local, I mean, this is as local as it can get. And so once you look at it, you have to like really learn about something local to understand what this kid is doing and what are these gestures.
Okay. Thank you. I think we have some time for some questions, if anyone has any. Some mics will be going around. Put your hands up if you've got any questions. Don't be shy.
It's partly in response to what you said, Thomas, about you think it's a good thing that there are no more iconic images. But I just want you to talk about that a bit more, because in the context of, say, war, Iraq, Afghanistan, it seems there are no iconic images that people really remember, say like they do from Vietnam. But isn't that a bad thing?
Well, I think when it comes to Iraq, there were iconic pictures. I think the Abu Ghraib pictures were the closest, were very iconic. It kind of screwed over every professional photographer that they were taken by a fairly despicable war criminal, but it's, yeah, that still existed. But in general, I think it's, look, my sense of doubt in general doesn't really go together with icon, because an icon is something so affirmatively clear, and they're always a little simplistic or a little, yeah, there's not so much doubt left with, and I think we're especially with all these pictures, we're in an age of confusion and it's not that it doesn't feel like it's an age of icons. So. But it comes with it. I don't think there's nothing we can do about it. It's not a conscious choice. It's not like, yeah.
But so everything's getting lost. I mean, it's impossible for there to be an iconic image. So everything's getting lost, yeah, because it's impossible for there to be an iconic image. Because in effect, things have speeded up since, say, Iraq.
But I think there's a lot of place for photography which is not iconic images. I think. Well, you have a couple of pictures. It's already, you have a story. You make a book. A lot of us still think sort of book in the end as something where you do or you redo. The magazine pieces are bigger. There's more space now. You can, the normal slideshow before it was all reduced to a 6-page magazine story. This was the classic format: an opener, 2 pages, whatever. This kind of very simplistic way. Now there are different ways.
I think also, like your point about the photos taken in Iraq. Is extremely important. There are also kind of like more flippant, less important things which are doing the same thing. So I've just thought, although I said there are no iconic images, but there are some extremely well-known images. So the meme of the boyfriend looking at the other girl's bum as she walks down the street, I'd only just thought about it now, but that probably is the image like of our age for the history books of the future. But it's not the photo. And in the example of Thomas's Iraq photos, the guy is not a photographer and is probably showing no artistry and didn't learn anything to do what happened. And the skill in the meme is with the person who first wrote the first funny meme that went with it, and then the skill in the thousands of people who have written equally hilarious topical memes for the same picture. So I think what it is part and parcel of sharing this thing. Like it doesn't have to. Yes, you can be the photographer, and you can be the. It's a bit more like being a film director. You know, there are a lot of people who are going to have to help you to get this thing done. But now it's very much crowdsourced. So again, like I say, it's probably me that's made all 15 to 20-year-olds know Paris, Texas by this one picture. But honestly, it's also them that's done it, because they're the ones that keep liking it. They're the ones that turn it into a meme. They're the ones that make it their user profile picture, even though they've never seen the film and certainly not bought the book. It's now the thing that defines them on the most important social media platform is that picture. It's them doing it. And so it's not surprising maybe it's that meme, the photo, that is, as far as I'm aware, the most popular picture in the world, or the most well-known or typical.
Thank you. Any more questions? Okay, there's somebody here.
Hi. So if we go back to curating, I always wondered how in the contemporary art, the art pieces or installations how is the price estimated? The price of an artwork. How is it estimated? How it's calculated? I don't know. I always wanted to know. So.
It's not exactly a curatorial question, because usually curators do.
No, I understand, but you might know better than me. So.
Well, it depends. Usually, if I see a work and I want to find out about the price of the artwork, and it's not the exhibition that I've curated, I usually ask who the artist is, and I would like to see the CV of the artist, where they've shown and what they've done before. And if they have not shown anywhere else, I would like to see their other works, and then find out how realistic and non-delusional they are, because sometimes you see the work and then you try to find out and they're not known, and they will say the price that then you realize that they don't really know contemporary art world. So it's not really how it's defined. It's like if you're talking about the starting artist, somebody who doesn't have a representation, it's usually the artist himself who defines and sort of knowing the scene, and that's how they come up with the price. So, yeah, I mean, they should come up with a price when they do not have a representation of a gallery.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I have a question.
Okay,
Hi.
Natalia.
I have a question for Irena and Thomas. What advice would you give to, an 18-year-old who wants to be either an artist or a journalist, photographer? What skills should they work on? Just what's the advice?
Well, first, I don't know. Should you be an artist or a photographer? That's already, or a journalist. You should make up your mind. In a nutshell, I think it sounds a bit stupid, but sort of live an interesting life. I mean, do something. Try to experience something that is important, because I think it doesn't have so much to do with technique anymore. Because one of the results also we have within, in art maybe it's different, but in photography, I think a lot of it's very. We've all seen how many people can pick up. Not least that war criminal in Iraq who took pretty much okay pictures. I would have changed a little bit, but there's not the difference between a professional photographer and an amateur is fading away for a lot of things. So I think the technique, you can pick it up, and then live something, be passionate about something, fix something like that. It's very hard to make that decision for somebody else, but I think that's maybe forget about photography, I think. sort of don't, because there are so many pictures out there, I think it's easy to be overwhelmed, and you get this feeling where everybody has already done everything, so you start doing it in reaction to the existing photography. So it's probably better to, yeah, to like get, sort of take pictures of something you care about in the widest sense.
Irena?
Okay. My assistant makes fun of me and says that I basically should wear a t-shirt that says "make work," because this is what I say to all the students all the time, because, or the young artists, because it's so important for them to make work. What Thomas said, it's also like, it's basically, it has to be based on their own experience of life, on their own interest, because nothing makes them more interesting when they're telling their story, because it's theirs and nobody else can tell the story. And then third and very important thing, they have to look. They have to look and be extremely curious about others' work. They should know. So a lot of times, you know, it happens, it's in zeitgeist, and they would do something that somebody else already has done. But, you know, sometimes it's extremely important for you to know who did it, how they did it, what was the context they did it. So it's not even, in a way, even if you are repeating it, you know, you are knowingly repeating something, and I'm not the one telling you, oh, this looks like so-and-so, you know. So it's, I think, sort of this visual knowledge is extremely important, you know, for them to look, and be curious about others' works, and not say like, no, I'm not interested, I'm not gonna go to the shows. Go and see as much work as possible.
Thank you. There's a question over there.
I want to ask, like, how much the feedback loop between people and audience is like playing for the content creator, like who is making the art, pictures, paintings, maybe contemporary art, like how people is shaping the artist, and how like artist should create his own or her own work to satisfy the audience. And is it like part of the artist's job to curate the work, what he's doing or she's doing, or is there like some medium, like as a curator should be like helping to do it?
So do I understand you correctly? Like, does somebody dictate to artists what kind of work they make?
Not dictate, but like having the feedback loop. Like, should the artist be like spending time and energy to observe like what is like nowadays is like possible, and like what to do in this moment? Like we were talking about the pictures, like how like picture culture, like taking like artwork, like bringing as a kind of how would say there is huge abundance of pictures. Like we were talking about the Instagram, we were talking about the Magnum pictures, and like how the value of the picture is going down because there is kind of this big amount of people like making too much like work out of it, and how like the artist who is kind of living in nowadays society should look forward to, like, I don't know, curate his own work and think about what people want now, like what is the next step.
Okay. I want to interrupt you. When you're talking curating, you're talking curating their work on Instagram, or curate their work in the studio, in a real space?
Yeah. Real space, not like Instagram only. Like maybe
in a real
it's,
space.
Yeah, it's exhibition maybe, I don't know.
So it depends. Like if you go to somebody's studio, you know, it's almost like being in a therapy session with them, because they show you everything. And there are artists who are smart and they edit out and they only show like parts of the work that you want to see. So I think it's smart in a way, like, you know, to basically select what they want you to see and not show you everything. And the same with the exhibition. I think you have to, it's really extremely important to think that the exhibition is about space. It's, in a way, it's about geometry. I always say that, because you walk in a space and you're looking around, and instead of like running up and looking at the image, what it is, I have to look at the space. Like, you know, everybody looks at the space. We exist in 3 dimensions, so it's not about the 2-dimensionality or something. So I think it's about seeing your work and, you know, like presenting it right. Presentation is extremely important.
Yes, I have a question to Thomas. I'm curious about this idea of abundance and how we deal with that abundance ourselves, and actually how photographers deal with that. There was a photographer who was traveling in this region 10 years ago, Keith Melnick, took interesting photos, and after a trip around the world, he said, well, I now have 60,000 photos. And I repeatedly went through my calculator and kind of thought, how long would it take him to even go through that to decide which ones to delete? So I'm curious, how does a photographer, who has many images, how do you deal with your own memories? Do you delete? Do you go back? How do you manage the abundance of the things that you have created?
Well, I think it's... Hello? Okay. Well, it's a lot. It's annoying, I think, in a way, but it's also... look, I don't delete anything. I think we should... I don't want to delete anything. I'm copying everything, treating it as if it was negatives, and I have a lot of unedited hard drives, stuff I never look at because I didn't have time. I haven't come around. I still grew up old school, so I'm used to. My feeling is I should look at every picture I took at least quickly, and then somehow flag it or not flag it. So I need to make. I've never been able to really dig into one big pile of pictures and say I'm looking for specific pictures, because I built the other way around. I mean, I take a lot of pictures, then it's less, and then it's less, and in the end it should be a reasonable amount. So yeah, and I don't know what do you do with 60,000 pictures? I don't know, you just take some time off and get up every morning and look at it as fast as you can. I think the difference is now what was really annoying, I think, was the early years of digital, when to look at raw digital pictures was some sort of like a visual onslaught of sheer horror because they looked so ugly. And also it was the first time I grew up on film, so you look at a film, you make a contact sheet, you pick a picture, then you get a print, and then if the picture isn't that's the first time you see the picture in big, and suddenly you see every picture you've taken in big, and it kills you. I mean, that I think was like, but I mean now it's like you get used to it, but I don't know how to do with the abundance. I don't know. We still need to reduce our output at the end of the whole thing to more or less reasonable amounts. I mean, there's no way around.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all we have time for today, but thank you all so much
Go and
for
edit your
speaking.
pictures.
And can we have a round of applause for our wonderful panelists? Thank you.